Rappin with ReefBum is sponsored by Champion Lighting and Supply, Polo Reef, and Fauna Marin.
Hey, what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin with ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. So on tonight's episode, we have a treat here. We've got Julian Sprung joining us once again. What's going on there, Julian? As well as Colin Foord. What's going on, guys?
Excited to be here. Thanks for having us, Keith.
Excited to have you guys on as well here. So, all right. Let me just do a little intro for these gentlemen here, in case folks are not familiar with them. Colin is a marine biologist and has a website called Coral Morphologic, right? Is that Morphologic?
It's a mouthful. Coral Morphologic. Yep.
Coral Morphologic, that provides a unique perspective on the hobby by combining science and art to help convey what is going on with the endangered reefs around the world. He has a very cool live stream going on that you should check out. Actually, I think there's a little video clip of the Coral City camera behind him, right? And that is an urban coral reef in Miami. So it's coralcitycamera.com if you want to check it out live for yourself, but it's probably going to be a little dark right there, Colin, right now? Or is there a little
yeah, no, but you could scroll back 12 hours. So you got 12 hours, you can go back earlier in the day, but yeah, it's nighttime right now in Miami.
So Julian, as many know, is the owner of Two Little Fishies, co-author of a revolutionary series of books called The Reef Aquarium, is a frequent speaker at conferences, and is a legend in our hobby for sure. Before we start chatting with these gentlemen, I want to take care of some business and thank the sponsors of this show. Polo Reef. Make sure to check out Polo Reef's new YouTube video that dropped last Friday, where the Polo team goes over updates from the infamous 900-gallon glass drop down. That thing, you got to check out that video. It's pretty unbelievable in terms of how it's just packed with corals right now. From breaking in transit, then redelivered to escaping inhabitants. Find out what's been going on with this crazy aquarium. Make sure to subscribe to their YouTube channel at Polo Reef for video drop notifications. Champion Lighting and Supply. Besides being a place for hobbyists to purchase saltwater aquarium supplies online, Champion Lighting is also a wholesale distributor for many popular brands. If you own an aquarium store or an aquarium service company, contact Champion Lighting through their website at championlighting.com to set up a wholesale account. And finally, Fauna Marin. I do use the Fauna Marin Reef IceCap Total Test Kit, which gives a quick, accurate, and easy overview of over 90 water values in reef aquariums. From macro elements to trace elements and pollutants, you get a complete overview with corresponding dosage and action recommendations. If you want help analyzing results, you could select myself, ReefBum, as your IceCap test advisor. You could also purchase those kits as well as other Fauna Marin products at reefbum.com. All right, so gentlemen, Colin, we kind of hinted a little bit in terms of what you're all about, man. But so people that are not familiar with your company, Coral Morphologic, give us the lowdown.
All right. So Coral Morphologic's entering its 18th year. We are founded here in Miami in 2007. I'm co-founder. The other half of Coral Morphologic is my best friend from middle school, JD McKay. The two of us come from your neck of the woods. We're from the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And I moved to Miami back in the year 2000 as a freshman, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and kind of had hoped to find professors and other aquarists or students that were into aquariums, and at that time it just didn't really exist. But I found the people, my student friends that were studying art and science, introduced me to kind of a whole nother world of expression, and what was happening in Miami was really exciting. So this idea that Miami is a coral city is kind of central to what we do, because there hasn't really been a lot of representation of Miami as a place of nature, and it is on the third largest reef tract in the world. And so Coral Morphologic was started as a way to introduce corals and the importance of coral reefs to people that were not scientists and were not divers, not aquarists. you know, especially people that live in Miami, as to why they're important. And, you know, we kind of start with just the beauty of the coral itself. And then, you know, you can draw them in and educate them utilizing, you know, art, photography, videography, multimedia, fashion, music, you know, just about any different way that we can kind of entrance people with the beauty of corals, because obviously we're all under the spell of corals. Most people watching here are under the spell of corals. So, you know, if we can bring more people under that tent, you know, and we can use art to do it, that's really kind of the goal of Core Morphologic.
Yeah, man, it's really unique. I'm not sure really anybody else in the world is doing what you're doing, you know, in terms of kind of mixing those different elements together there.
Yeah, I mean, Miami's I like to say it's a place where worlds collide. Lots of different cultures, lots of different elements are coming together. It's literally, you know, sandwiched between two national parks, a land-based one and an ocean-based one, Biscayne National Park, Everglades National Park, you know, north, south, New World, Old World. And so, you know, there's a lot of alchemy that can take place here, which is exciting. Of course, Julian is born and raised here. You know, I grew up, you know, when I first started getting into reef aquariums, of course, back in the day, magazines were the way that we got a lot of our information. So Freshwater and Marine Aquarium magazine, FAMA magazine. Julian had his Reef Notes column, and of course he had his books out at that time. And so I knew who Julian was, you know, before he ever met me. And of course that was you know, going to Miami and studying in a place called Coral Gables was kind of a no-brainer. And of course now I'm, you know, privileged to you know, call him a friend and can go over and bug him for help and answers and products. And you know, but Miami is such it's such an interesting place where all of these, you know, the world of aquarium keeping and diving kind of intersect. So you know, it's a great place for us to do our work for via Coral Morphologic.
So I want to thank Amanda Meckley for that super chat. Thank you so much, Amanda. If we send him super chats, maybe Keith will keep doing live streams. And then Rob, upstate New York, I want to thank you also, man, for that live stream. His comment is I second bribery laugh out loud. So Colin, man, the Coral City camera, why?
Yeah. Well, you know, and you know, Julian, of course, he's known since he was 9 years old that you don't even really need a boat to be able to find marine life here in Miami. And I think one of the reasons, you know, Coral Morphologic is kind of it's a DIY approach to marine science. I think a lot of people imagine coral science is coral scientists going to far remote places around the world looking for the last untouched pristine reefs before the tourists ruin it. And you know, early on in Coral Morphologic, one of the ways that we were able to support ourselves was, you know, I worked as a marine life collector. I lived down in the Keys, and so I was always exploring, looking for, in particular, zoanthids and corallomorphs. Of course, that's where Coral Morphologic we're named after the corallomorphs, you know, Recordia, Florida being the most iconic. And just doing some simple exploration around Miami, started to discover that there was all of these corals living in places that you never would have imagined corals. And one of those places was at the Port of Miami, and that's where we've put the Coral City camera. And it's pretty remarkable because this is all basically man-made.
Is the sound coming through okay, Keith?
I'm hearing like a little clipping here and there. Do you guys hear that?
I'm getting some clipping too, and I don't know if it's me or if it's all of us.
I don't know. Yeah, I want to make sure if there wasn't something wrong with the mic there.
It might be on my end.
It could be. Yeah, I mean, Colin, if you have anything else open, then that might be providing some feedback. I mean, it's not terrible.
Yeah, it was doing it for you a little bit too, but maybe it's feeding back.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, but it's definitely worse for me. Maybe I moved back a little bit. It wasn't doing it earlier.
People, if any of the viewers out there, if you guys are hearing this and it's like some serious audio issues, let me know in the chat.
I'm hearing it from you, Keith, as well. So
Yeah. The sound problem is Colin only. Interesting. Let's let's press on and
yeah, sorry about that. I just thought I'd mention it in case.
No, yeah, it's
control.
always a little annoying to have the feedback, but so the Coral City camera is at the east end of Port of Miami. It's in about 8 feet of water. The rocks, like the rocks that you see behind me, are just limestone riprap boulders that were placed there, I think, in about 2013. So all of this marine life is pretty much self-recruited over the past decade or so. We've got about 22 different species of stony corals living here, which is about half of what the coral diversity that we have in Florida. And so it really defies expectation for where corals live, certainly, in this backdrop of coral reef decline, bleaching, disease. The fact that there are corals that are kind of pioneering into the city of Miami is something that I feel is worth investigating scientifically, because these are clearly corals that are evolving in real time to live in these locations. And of course, so we have been doing research with scientists from NOAA, and we've published a few papers, one in Nature, about they've taken tissue samples from the corals that are living at the port and found that they are expressing genes that are associated with resilience and immune response, as well as having a different microbiome than the same species of corals that are living offshore that have in large part suffered a lot more over recent years. So, these corals that are living at the port do indeed seem to be more resilient. And that's a silver lining that sort of gives us hope that, corals, they're the ultimate survivors. I think that if corals had a motto, it would be adapt or die, because you're cemented in place. You can't just swim and find cooler water or cleaner water. You just have to deal with whatever conditions get thrown your way. And obviously corals have been on this planet for millions of years and have survived multiple mass extinction events. And, they just, I think the nature of the way that they reproduce, where they're all releasing their gametes together at the same time, allows for a lot of mixing of the genes with different parents and hybridization, and that gives them, I think, in a way that's it's a blessing for the corals that they're able to kind of reproduce so widely. And then the larvae get sucked into the inlet here, on the tides, and they're able to settle out on these seawalls, on these riprap shorelines. And of course, Florida doesn't really have a lot of steep, rocky shorelines to begin with. It's either mangroves or beaches, and so these habitats, especially right there at the port, are in a way kind of really unique to Florida. In fact, it's kind of one of my favorite spots. I keep going out, and when I'm scuba diving, which I usually don't, since I'm normally just snorkeling to service the camera, it's like a canyon, it drops down to 50 feet because they bring all the ships in through government cut. And when the water's clear, and it's not always clear, but when it is clear, it's one of the most amazing dive sites in Florida. Of course, not very safe. Wouldn't really recommend it to the average person, but it's an example of kind of how corals and marine life have been able to take advantage of this kind of taxpayer-funded infrastructure that we've created for them. And you know, I'd like to believe that they're some of the most scientifically valuable corals on the planet. But of course, the big question with these corals is they're living at the port. They may be evolved. They might be more resilient than the other corals out in the national park. But are they spawning? You know, because they're under light pollution. There's a tremendous amount of light. You know, there's the same way that with when the sea turtles are in hatching season, there's city ordinances that require the lights to be turned off so that the sea turtles don't walk towards the streets instead of the ocean. And you know, we know that lighting is incredibly important for spawning corals. That you know, if you turn your lights on, you know, before they're spawning, that it can mess them up and they don't spawn. So clearly light sensitivity is one of those things that contributes to a coral's reproductive success. So, you know, the next phase of kind of all this work we're doing, kind of a culmination really, is building a new lab next to the Coral Morphologic lab that's specifically for native corals and for the purpose of restoration, because these corals could go back into the ocean, and obviously we have to be biosecure. We have to keep them separate. And the goal will be to bring in corals from the port and get them under lighting. We get them on a light cycle that induces them to spawn when corals in Florida spawn, which is usually a few nights after a full moon in the summertime. So that's kind of the last big question. Well, I guess there's probably more questions about these corals, but it's a big one, is getting them to spawn, because obviously you need the next generation of these baby corals for hopefully the purpose of restoration, which is the goal. So that's kind of what we're up to now. But of course, I encourage everybody to watch the Coral City camera. You can just have it up on any screen. I've started calling it's a free range aquarium. So, you know, it's sort of like
you never know what you're gonna get. You never know what you're
gonna get. And that's, you know, it's really exciting. You know, when you get a manatee, or you get a lemon shark, or you get a sea turtle or a dolphin, it's kind of like, I mean, it never gets old to see manatees. And Julian, I'm sure it's still the same for you, and you have a canal behind your house, and you know, when you see a big you know, charismatic megafauna in your backyard, it never gets old. And so I'd say that the slogan that we have for the Coral City camera is civic pride through biodiversity, because we're trying to get it into all the schools in Miami. Not too many places have the level of biodiversity that Miami has, and it's not always so clear where nature ends and where the city begins, and there's a lot of overlap there. And you know, it's something that you know, a big part of the goal of the camera is accessibility, and it's also, you know, it's equitable, and there's nobody behind the camera, which is also, I think, quite interesting. If you think about pretty much every marine life documentary that you've ever watched, there was always somebody behind the camera there. And, you know, as somebody who is a underwater photographer, videographer, you know, fish like to swim away from you when you want to get close to them. But the Coral City camera is unique because there is no one there, and the fish just kind of, we're just watching them do their natural thing.
Hey, we got two Julians.
We do. I bet you didn't know that Two Little Fishies, that's the secret right there.
Nice.
I did this because the sound has been just awful on my computer. I wanted to see if it was that way on the phone.
Now we have Julian in 3D stereo.
Yeah, we've got you echoing. You know, it seemed like when Colin was talking that the audio issue, I didn't hear any problem. It sounded like it was fixed. You were still hearing some clipping, Julian?
Yeah, so it's got to be my computer. What I'm going to do, I'm going to log out on the computer.
Of the computer? Okay.
Yeah.
You could mute the computer also.
I did.
Oh, okay.
So, but you guys don't want to have two of me, right?
No, and then I would turn your phone landscape so you could, yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Okay.
But now you're going to have to hold your phone up.
Well, it sounds a whole lot better.
Okay. All right. So yeah, why don't you close your laptop out and then
Yep.
there you go. Okay.
And now you're looking at my hand. Okay.
So is the audio sound better? Audio sound better for you now, Julian?
100% better. It was
Okay.
really getting bad. So there must be something going on with the speaker on my computer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me
Salt
just
water
thank
will do that.
let me just thank Rob upstate New York again, man, for that second super chat. Appreciate that. At least once a quarter. Come on, buddy. 4 times a year. All right. Well, you know, that's something to think about, I guess. But Chris Carney, who's now going by the screen name Chris Coral Apnea C. Colin, your collaborations are on fire. And Amanda Meckley, I second that, Chris. So, all right, you guys, Julian, how did you, you know, we're going to be talking about your lighting project that you're collaborating on, but how did you guys find one another? You know, what kind of collaborations have you guys done in the past, or what sort of things have you worked on in the past?
You know, it just started somewhere, but it was hard for me to pick up the exact moment. Colin told me that our first meeting was, correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, at a MACNA, the one in Fort Lauderdale.
It was in the year 2000, and it was MACNA was in Fort Lauderdale, and I was able to sit at your table at, you know, when they have the dinner, Saturday night dinner, you know, so
banquet.
The banquet, yes, and so it was yeah, you know, again, for someone who'd been reading your books and your articles, you know, it was definitely a very cool experience. So I just got into the University of Miami, and you know, I mean, even just that whole experience of coming to Miami, you know, I met the right people at the right time. There was a fellow named Daniel Smith who had an online website called Coral Reef Productions, and you know, before I got to Miami, I was doing some research on the internet to find, like, you know, I wanted to find an aquarium store to work at, naturally, because, you know, as a reef junkie, you're always trying to make things as cheap as possible and get the plug, so to speak. And so I found coralreefproductions.com, and it turns out it was just a website. So Daniel was a student at the University of Miami. He was a grad student at that point. He was selling clams online, and he was one of the first sellers of the Marshall Islands clams. This was before ORA was bringing them in from the Marshall Islands, before they bought it, or before, you know, they had exclusivity. And so, you know, I had reached out to him saying, hey, you know, I want to work for your company. He said, well, you know, it's not really a store. I just, you know, I go to the post office and I just ship it off, because he had been working, and there was a local store that Julian was also familiar with called Gables Aquarium next to Sunset Place in South Miami, George Gianpetro. And so, and I think you have some pictures in your books from Gables Aquarium.
Yes.
You know, so I wound up working at Gables Aquarium. I still have I call it the Gables Green star polyps that they're growing, and they had a 72-gallon bow front right in the front of the store. And that was, you know, I kind of, you know, through Daniel, he took me to all the wholesalers, because what he would do, he would get these orders, he would sell dry goods, and then he would go and buy the dry goods after somebody bought it online, and then he'd go to the post office and they would ship it. And, you know, this was really before anyone was doing, you know, buying stuff online was still pretty new 24 years ago. And
there were some, but
but it wasn't quite,
not like now.
Wasn't quite there yet.
Reefer madness.
Right, Reefer Madness.
Reefer Madness. You know, I mean, I grew in
that fish place was.
I kind of went down this memory hole a couple of weeks. 10 days ago, I spoke at the University of Miami, their aquarium club, and you know, my education for learning about corals online, garf.org.
Yes.
Geothermal Aquaculture Reef Foundation. And so I went there.
Leroy and Sally. Sally Joe.
And they're based
in Leroy.
They were based in Idaho, right?
Yes.
Idaho, yeah, they were, they had geothermal hot spring that enabled them to keep their greenhouse tropical all year long, and they were really one of the first coral sellers. I mean, so I went to their website like last week. It doesn't exist anymore. It's they no longer are maintaining it. It's this real wealth of it's a real snapshot, a history of the early days of kind of the internet, and the sharing of knowledge. And they were trying to encourage people to grow corals. You can make money, you can sell, grow your own corals. So that was kind of what I was following in high school. And I guess it was my junior year in high school in 1998. Garf held a workshop at the Smithsonian the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. And since my aunt and uncle lived in Washington, D.C., I flew down there and I attended this workshop that they held, and that was really another transformative experience where I saw Xenia for the first time. I saw, we learned how to frag Xenia. It was kind of like, here's this thing that will just make you all this money, Xenia, everybody wants it. And I saw my first nano reef. It was back when CPR Aquatics, I think, made one of the first all-in-one aquariums, the CPR MRT, the micro reef tank. It was a 13-gallon acrylic tank with a built-in sump in the back and a protein skimmer, and so that was really was transformative for me to be able to experience that. But so the reason why I was going to this website, I was looking for was basically the first digital photographs of me on the internet or from that conference on Garf, and I had to go to the Internet Wayback Machine. So if you want to go look at garf.org and really see the origins of the online aquarium hobby, you got to go to the Wayback Machine, and really just I spent a bunch of time last week looking at it. It was really a really throwback, but at the same time, this is what the hobby was founded on, people's passion, sharing it across the internet. I don't think that we would have the hobby that we have without the internet. I think that you can't talk about the reef aquarium hobby and our knowledge of how to keep them alive without also considering just what impact the internet had. I mean, Julian, for you, obviously you predated the internet. I don't want to call you out a little bit, but because obviously you're from magazines and books and but at the same time, how did the internet impact your from your perspective? Tell me about the early days with the internet and how that kind of connected you with people.
Well, it created a really easy bridge across continents. It was easier to talk to people all around the world, and it formed social groups, of course. I think for a lot of the aquarists, that the CompuServe, listserv, fishnet, that was really kind of a great way of sharing information, a great place. So that happened. And of course, email, instead of using the phone and fax machines, was really very helpful and quick. So that's all. It did change the pace of sharing of information when it was print. Before, there was a monthly cycle, whereas the internet really made it a daily cycle. It became like CNN, an hourly cycle. That's it. There was always a pressured interest in new content for print publications, but once news became as urgent as daily, that really blew up the hunger for new content. you know, even to this day, it's the same way. I think in most respects, it was very helpful in evolving. What is this? That's right. Something just happened on my phone there. It was helpful in promoting the hobby and helping it to evolve.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that there was such like the information went so much faster for the hobbyists.
Yeah.
You know, because I talk about it a lot in relation to my experience of coming to the University of Miami. Let me share. I want to share because I dug this out for my.
And let me also mention that there were some definite positives, but there's also been some negatives because there's a lot of information out there.
Of course.
And some of it is not, and some of it's not good.
Right.
Let's see.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, you know, when we were talking about, Colin, you know, all your creations in multimedia, unless people go to your website, they're you know, really not going to have an idea. I hope you show some. It looks like you're about to show some scenes.
Yeah, I was trying to go like I usually use Keynote, so I'm like.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, let me thank Ryan Washington for the super chat comment.
Yeah.
Quarterly, I'm not ready for life without your live streams. Man, there's full court press on here, huh? They keep this thing going.
Okay.
Right.
Well, you know, I think it's probably it's I can just do it here. So, you know, this is you know, and the University of Miami Aquarium Club, I believe, is the first aquarium club at a university. And so when I got to the University of Miami in the year 2000, you know, I was already coming from a internet world. You know, I had already learned fragmentation. I was growing corals in my bedroom. You know, so this is the portfolio that I sent unsolicited to the University of Miami with all of my aquariums that I had in my room, and you know, I was managing the aquarium section of my local pet store in the Mount Washington Valley Mall, and you know, I showed up expecting to find other students and professors that surely if you're a marine biologist, you must have a saltwater aquarium, right? Like I was just very, very naive. And when I got to the University of Miami, I was surprised to find that, you know, my professors literally told me corals couldn't be kept alive in captivity, that it was a death sentence, and that hobbyists that were keeping corals in their tanks were part of the reason why coral reefs were dying, and that, you know, that we shouldn't be doing it, basically. And I was like, wait a minute, you know, like I'm here to learn from you guys, and why are you telling me stuff that I know is not true? And there was nothing alive in the lab. It was all dead skeletons and you know, specimens in jars of formaldehyde. And so, you know, I literally, one of the things that I packed, you know, I flew to the University of Miami, was I got myself one of those CPR 13-gallon nano tanks. So I had a tank set up my freshman year. And then once I lived off campus, I got this bigger aquarium that you see. And Julian, Julian took this photograph because that is the first photograph. You know, the photograph on the left is the first photograph in the Reef Aquarium Volume 3, in the introduction, where you're talking about how you know, reef aquariums are powerful tools for education. And so that aquarium I donated in 2002 before I studied abroad at the university, James Cook University in Australia. I could have sold it, you know, made money for my trip, but I just thought it was crazy that there was no marine life in the marine science lab at the University of Miami. And so I donated my 100-gallon or 90-gallon reef tank with all the corals and set it up. I helped set up the first coral aquaculture systems at Rasmus as an undergrad, because they didn't have it. They weren't doing any coral aquaculture even at the grad school at that time. And so, you know, I came back from my semester abroad and continued to maintain the tank during my senior year. And then after I graduated, then, somebody else needed to take it over. And so this is, I think, Ben West. He was maintaining it maybe in 2005 when he took that photograph. So I wasn't there when he took the photograph. But then after he graduated, nobody was really in a position to take it over. And so that the aquarium club started as kind of a group of students to take care of the aquarium that I had donated. So there was no aquarium club when I got there. And of course, it was a different time. And I talk about this sometimes about how, in the 90s, the pop cultural zeitgeist was Free Willy. And most of my classmates were, was like, why are you here to study marine biology? And, more than half of them put their hands up to say, oh, I want to be a dolphin trainer at SeaWorld. This is before Blackfish. This was, so nobody had any interest in little tiny creatures, reef aquariums, corals. This was just not part of the zeitgeist yet. And, really, looking back, and I think about probably like the three most important things in pop culture that really brought people into the aquarium hobby. If I had to say what they were, I would say that Finding Nemo came out in like 2002. I remember I was working at Gable's Aquarium when that came out. I remember the aquarium industry was really, concerned about, we're going to get all these kids, they're going to want saltwater aquariums, they're all going to want clownfish. We need to have captive bred clownfish. We don't want, to make it into a bad thing that, all of a sudden, people are thinking that they can keep saltwater fish in a goldfish bowl or something like that. So Finding Nemo was a big game changer. It changed the zeitgeist from the Free Willy to all of a sudden the coral reef. I think the rise of blue LEDs definitely brought way more people in, just because all of a sudden, I remember my first, I had the first reef aquarium I got a Coral Life retrofit dual 175 watt metal halide with two 40-watt actinic normal output, the T12 bulbs. That was and I love metal halide. I love the sound. I like how they warm up, but really, LEDs were like, wow, like suddenly, because I vividly remember, I remember when I first got my license, I had to drive to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which was about, an hour and a half south of where I lived, to an aquarium store. And then I literally had never seen corals under actinic or blue wavelengths of light. And I remember going in for the first time and like all the way at the back of the store. So I could see it as I was walking back, like these, I guess they were acanthophilia. They were meat corals, red meat corals, huge, the biggest ones, even to this day. I mean, maybe it's in my memory, but they were like 16 inches in diameter, like just big and fat, the fattest red fluorescent corals. And it was like timeout. Nobody told me that corals were fluorescent. Like this was completely blew my mind. I already thought corals were cool, but I didn't know that they were fluorescent. So, obviously when LEDs came out, it really popped the color. And I think a lot of people started getting into it. And I would say maybe the third thing that I hear a lot about, it wasn't, for me, it didn't do anything. I wasn't even watching television at that point, but that show tanked. I hear a lot of people tell me like, oh, I got into aquarium keeping because I was this television show, and then it's always usually followed up with, and now I know that most of the stuff they did was wrong, but it got me into the hobby. So those are kind of like the three things that I think are really transformative for the aquarium hobby. Obviously the internet, the rise of blogs, and Garf really was a blog before people were calling them blogs. Like I was reading Sally Joe's entries. They're all just journal entries and really powerful. And I mean, I think that probably the first named coral, I know I've heard different things. The purple people eater, Blaine Perrine named the purple people eater zoanthid, but I'm pretty sure that the Garf bonsai acro is probably the first like real named coral, and I grow it.
I still have one. I mean, I have one. I mean, it was sold to me as a Garf bonsai. I mean, it is a bonsai. I don't know if it's the original Garf bonsai, but that's what it was sold to me as. But it's gorgeous coral.
Classic.
Yeah.
You have it in your tank, Julian. I've got
I have it. Yeah.
in my tank. You know, so like I'm a big fan of history and, you know, knowing, like, I love how, you know, even in my collection of corals, like where it came from, and, you know, the story that it's not just the natural history origin of where did that coral come from, but it's like who had it, who grew it, like it, you know, all of the, you know, I like how every coral has its own story, and that's, you know, a really it makes it a lot more interesting. And I can tell you, maybe not all of them, but so like in the photo on the right here that I took, you can see there's a Montipora capricornus, you know, I don't think it's capricornus, that's what we call it, the red one. I still have that. I still grow that from this tank. So I have a few corals in my collection that you know go back almost, you know, 24 years, probably about 22 years. What's the oldest coral that, well, I know, actually, I think I know the oldest coral are your Duncans your oldest lineage?
No, they're second.
Second.
The oldest one I have is a Pavona cactus,
Right.
which came as a hitchhiker on a blue discosoma mushroom anemone colony from Indonesia, and I popped it off. I said, oh, there's a little Pavona on that, and that was before my trip to Australia where I got the Duncans. So it was in 1990, and I still, I'm growing it. That's a potato chip coral, basically.
Potato chip. Is that the one? Is that the one that ORA grows as
well?
No.
No, the ORA one is it's a different species that looks like Pavona cactus, but the blades are slightly smaller. And I can't think of the species name at the top of my head right now, but easy enough to look up. And I think they have the right species name if you go to the ORA website. And I got that one at a convention in Strasbourg.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The stories. Yeah.
So that Pavona, was very successful in culture in Europe. And I could see that and decided to bring it home, and it grew like a weed in my aquarium. And I spoke to the people at ORA. I said, I think you need to get this in culture. It's amazing. It's a brown coral, but to me, very, very beautiful. And now I think everybody probably has it. Mint chip, they call it.
Mint chip.
Yeah.
Chris Meckley mentions the Milka stylo, and there's a great story behind that coral as well, and that's certainly made its rounds in the hobby. I mean, so Colin, you mentioned super corals before in terms of what's growing, off of Miami on the reefs, and those are just super resilient types of corals that can handle a lot of different water conditions and take a beating, but still keep ticking. Are there any parallels between, those types of corals that are growing off of Miami, those super corals, versus the Garf bonsais, versus the Milka stylos? Are there some similar traits that we could look at, or?
I mean, I would say just from a practical perspective, they're similar in the sense that, any coral, especially a coral that's been in the hobby for 30 years, obviously has some resilience, where, I think that it always seems to be the case that the more exotic the coral, the more colors, the more expensive it is, like the more sensitive it is, it seems, right? This is always usually the case. But
What is that that's going behind you?
This
I'm not seeing
Look like
my.
a giant
the
octopus.
wiper cleaning.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
the wiper. Yeah, so every 4 hours we call it the wiper fish. It's a automated wind like wiper that it is there's a lot of turbidity at the port. So without the wiper, we get a lot of algae and sediment that builds up. And there's been times when the wiper is broken and I have to go every single day with a toothbrush to keep it clean. But yeah, it's for 5 years I've been in addition to having a whole warehouse full of corals that are kind of on life support and dependent upon me keeping them alive, I have this underwater robot that is also a whole handful of responsibility, and on top of that, I have people I have the people that watch the Coral City camera that we call them the coral heads, and they're day in day out watching. There's a chat on YouTube, and of course, welcome to anybody to join in on the chat, because we have a timestamp down on the bottom left hand corner of the Coral City camera, where if something interesting goes past, oh look, who's that guy?
Yeah,
that must be you.
That's the Colin fish. There's a wiper fish and a Colin fish. So I have my toothbrush and yeah, people, you watch the camera as part of, it's very relaxing. I mean, they've done research. It's called aquarium therapy, where you have people, watch fish swim around in a tank, your blood pressure goes down, your anxiety goes down. Of course, I'm always quick to point out that, yeah, sure, but the guy who has to maintain the aquarium, there's a balance between the stress of being de-stressed. It's one thing to just watch an aquarium. It's another thing to actually be responsible for for keeping it alive. So sometimes that's more stressful. But that's one of the reasons why I think the Coral City camera is so great is we're just watching fish swim by. You don't know what's going to swim by. So when the shark or the manatee goes past, you can put the timestamp in. We have a citizen science spreadsheet that then all the daily entries of the interesting things go on that list. When I get home at the end of my day at the lab, I make screen recordings of, say, 20 to 50 observations that took place throughout the day. So I've been able to, we've seen 210 species of fish, plus the manatees, dolphins, sea turtles. And I think now in 5 years, I've made about 60,000 of these clips, which is kind of an insane,
wow.
If I added up all of that time. Of course, we got it in the water just before the pandemic. And so, this was a great thing to have. It gave me something to do. It felt like I was contributing to the well-being of people's mental health. And what I didn't take into account when I always knew that we were going to see some really interesting marine life at where we put the Coral City camera. But what I didn't anticipate was the community of people that gathered around the camera. So it's like as above, so below. You have this coral reef and has all this life, and similarly, the camera itself has attracted all of these people. And it's kind of like I describe it as like a digital campfire where we can all watch remotely the same. We're all watching the same thing. So when that manatee goes past, it's kind of like we all communally experience, you get that dopamine and that serotonin of like, wow, did you just see it? And then there's a chat, and we all kind of communicate to each other. We say good morning and good evening, and it's a really, I like to call it the most positive place on the internet, because it's all good vibes only. And all we do is talk about the fish, and and of course last summer was a little sketchy with the bleaching that you can't turn away. It's just we were watching it unfold, and yet the corals. Let me see if I can share the videos from the time lapses.
While you're doing that, I'm going to thank the Boston Reefer Society for their super chat. Thanks, guys. Many thanks as always, Keith, for the extensive list of guests and knowledge so freely shared here. Appreciate that. Oh wow, so this is a time lapse, Colin?
This was a time lapse of last summer. So we partnered University of Miami, they have a restoration program called Rescue Reef, and they're growing staghorn corals offshore in their nursery. And I suggested to them, well, look, bring in some different genotypes of your corals, and we'll plant them at the Coral City camera to try and find the most hardy and resilient strains, because obviously, and we learned this last summer, that you can spend 10 years planting and growing corals, but if they can't survive that one hot summer, then you've just lost a decade of time and energy, and it's really heartbreaking to everyone involved. And so if you can find the hardiest strains, you can focus on them. So they brought in a bunch of different strains, planted them here. And so this starts in May of 2023, May 1st. You can see the corals, they're growing, and then they bleach, and then they die. And then what I find really interesting is you can see how they almost erode back the same speed at which that they grew. And that's, of course, because we have a tremendous amount of parrotfish that are grazing on the algae, and they're rasping off of they just erode these skeletons. So unfortunately, all of their genotypes of our native staghorn corals and elkhorn corals died. However, we have native to the port, and this is, I was the first person to use the term supercoral back in 2011 to describe what I thought were hybrid corals, hybrid Acropora prolifera, which is a hybrid between the staghorn and elkhorn corals. I was wrong, but where I found the mother colonies growing on seawalls, they just weren't growing in the natural form like I had seen before. So a few years ago, we got permits to collect fragments from those mother colonies. We have a little nursery frame nearby the Coral City camera where we planted them, and lo and behold, they started growing more like a classical elkhorn and staghorn corals. But if you notice, so there's two main corals staghorn corals to notice. There's the one behind the brain coral that's kind of in the upper middle part of the screen, and there's another one down in the lower left-hand side. And the one in the lower left-hand side is the one that was a University of Miami coral, and the one behind the brain coral is the native coral to the port. And you'll notice that the one that came from offshore bleached, died, it was over. The one behind the brain coral didn't even bleach. Same species. And so, the one that was native to the port did really well, which, makes sense that basically when a coral settles out at the port, only the ones that can survive are going to make it. And so, in a lot of ways, this is kind of like our aquariums are kind of proving grounds as well, where, only the strongest really survive, in everybody's tanks. So we've been studying now the sort of the genes of this. I call it Acer ventura. So the scientists they abbreviate things, and I'm always code switching, right? We say Acropora, scientists say Acropora, so it's Acropora cervicornis. They call it Acer for A cervicornis, and so I've named this strain Acer ventura since they're all the same. They're clones of each other, and this is a really interesting coral. We also there's a strain of elkhorn coral that also is native to the port that didn't bleach last summer, grows really great, and living, I'm certainly they're the only intercoastal elkhorn and staghorn corals in all of Florida. So, you can see that the corals that are here at the port, they're literally growing right at the low tide line. Here's a brain coral. I think this, this is a bigger colony of Acer ventura right here. Just a beautiful coral. Really, so we know that it is hosting a type of zooxanthellae called Durastinium, which previously had never, I don't think it's ever been documented in staghorn corals in Florida before. But it is known to be the heat-resistant strain. Interestingly, Durastinium, they've done genetic research on it, and it appears that it is a recent invader of the Caribbean. Only within the last 50 years, it came from the Pacific. I have some ideas of how it got here, but thank goodness it did in a sense, because pretty much all of the brain corals, all of these urban corals for the most part are hosting this Durasdinium zooxanthellae, which is gives them the heat resistance. And so we've published a few different papers, co-authored. Really the lead scientist did the hard work. I just sort of had the idea, made it all possible, took care of the corals, knowing full well that we needed to study these corals, and I'm glad that they have. And that's will be kind of it demonstrates that there is a lot of plasticity in terms of the resilience of certain strains of corals. And like you were saying, in the home aquarium, the ones that manage to survive continue to be propagated. And I like to think, when you grow corals at home, Coral Morphologic has a slogan or a tagline: human coral symbiosis, right? Because in a sense, these corals are using us to keep themselves alive. And obviously the ornamentality is a big part of why humans are attracted to them. We spend all of our money to keep them alive. People want to pay money to get fragments of them. And we have, you can have the same genotype of coral, clones of these corals living in aquariums all around the world. Whether it's ORA that's selling them or just being traded. And so in a way, it's like these corals are using us. It's like they might as well be living on a space station, right? You have corals growing in Vermont, right? Like, what is a coral reef doing in Vermont? Like, completely an alien environment. And yet, we're putting our time and energy and we're growing them. And, from an evolutionary perspective, that's really successful. But it only is possible because humans are attracted to them. We formed this symbiosis with these corals, and that's kind of like what we we're trying to create that. I guess this isn't going to play.
Not going to play.
Yeah.
If you put it maybe in slideshow mode, would that?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out from current slide. Yeah, I think that.
There you go.
Yeah. So these, everybody, and we can just kind of keep talking. We don't have to focus entirely on this, but everyone always says, oh, Caribbean corals, they're not colorful, they're not fluorescent. It's kind of BS. Most corals have some level of fluorescence. It's true that we don't have quite as many reds and pinks and oranges, which obviously people really like. But all of these corals here are native to the port itself. I filmed this, and when I was filming this, cruise ship went past, which was also a really insane thing. When these cruise ships go past, they displace so much water that it creates it's like a hurricane underwater. And I had to hold on with one hand onto the rock and the other hand onto my camera, and it was like holding on for dear life. And then 3 minutes later, it's back to being perfectly calm, and I continued doing my filming. This Meandrina, so we get little hints of different types of color. The orange mouth, mostly green, but still, it's like Parides, asteroides. It's
amazing.
It's important. Yeah, it's important to remember that our corals here in the Caribbean are really also beautiful, but there's a lot less biodiversity here than in the Indo-Pacific, and that's a whole
what about collection of corals in the Caribbean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's a single place in the Caribbean that stony corals are legally collected. Of course, we have soft corals. We've got the rock flower anemones, the corallomorphs, the Ricordea of Florida in particular, of which I'm indebted to for I basically, after I graduated, I started working as a marine life collector down at Big Pine Key, and I was working for a fellow who is selling most of his marine life to Seagrass Farms, which is a great big freshwater and saltwater wholesale company based out of Tampa. and he was selling, there was no bag limits on Recordia back then. We could go out and collect, between the two of us, we collect like 600 in a day. And he was selling them for, greens were $1, blues were $2, and oranges were $3. And I remember, so eBay had pretty much just started, or, it had been around a few years, but people were just starting to sell on eBay. Morgan Moore was one of the first people I remember. She was selling, one of the first people selling corals on eBay. And I would see that the Recordia polyps were selling for like $50, $60, $70 each. And so I asked my boss, like, well, would you mind if I picked like 10 a week from the ones that I collected and I'll sell them on eBay? He was like, yeah, sure, whatever, that's fine. Like, because again, we were collecting hundreds of them. And I was making, suddenly I started making more money from, isn't that a nice Pseudodiplorea strigosa? This is Acer ventura here with the green fluorescence, which is also weird for a staghorn coral. So I started making like $600 or $700 a week on just one auction. And by doing that, I was able to save enough money to buy an underwater camera, a digital camera, and I got an opportunity to do an internship in Bali, where I wound up writing a handbook on coral mariculture as a way for fishermen that were using cyanide and dynamite is a more sustainable way to make an income. And that, of course, when I was in Bali for 8 months, I met Vincent Chalier, who was is a pioneer of coral mariculture. And of course, being in Bali, surrounded a place that's so full of culture and art, really helped solidify this kind of art science thing that when I got back to Miami and my boss sold his business. And so, I moved back up to Miami and then we started Coral Morphologic, but, it's really all related to, well, for one, Recordia Florida really is kind of the impetus for, and of course, like I said earlier, is where Coral Morphologic gets its name from. So, yeah, that's a kind of a bit of a backstory on how Coral Morphologic came to be, and the corals at the port, and how they're the super corals, and how now we hope to be spawning them. And I'll show you briefly, and then we segue to the lights, because this is a good.
Yeah, I was going to say I get you guys got to talk about the project you're working on.
Yeah, so this is. Let me see here. Let me see. Am I share? Okay. So this is the new lab that we're building, and you can see in the bottom left-hand corner is a round tub. I'm going to call that the coral clock. And the goal here is to put a camera in the center of it, like the Coral City camera. It's going to rotate once an hour. So it's literally a clock. It'll have a timestamp. It'll stream on YouTube. You'll be able to just watch it. And over the top, we will, well, on the inside, we're going to build a donut reef utilizing native urban corals. And then we will put the GNC Blu-ray lights over the top of it on the lighting schedule that mimics the solar and lunar cycles to get them to spawn. So the goal, of course, now is to bring these corals into the lab, get them to spawn, and try and settle some really resilient babies that hopefully will be useful for restoration. And so these lights, which Julian and I have been kind of working with the company to try and develop an app that is going to make it much more simplified in terms of getting them programmed to follow those solar and lunar cycles. Let me see.
So that's what Julian has over the tank behind him, correct? It's the GNC Blu-ray X lights.
Yes.
And my understanding is that these are the lights that are going to have the cutting edge technology to help promote that coral sexual reproduction in home aquarium or a captive aquarium systems, correct?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, the development of the technology is really to help it for coral spawning for reef restoration, which is, no pun intended, a growing field. And it, the lights not only have that feature of providing the solar and lunar cycles, but they're also robust. They're built in a way that makes them waterproof. They don't have fans that get clogged up with dust and salt. So you have a light that's engineered right from the start to be ideal for an environment like you would have in a greenhouse or in any kind of a coral farm. And of course, that makes them ideal in over home aquariums as a side benefit as well.
How long, Julian, have you had those? Go ahead, Colin.
No, yeah. I mean, I was going to add that, one of the things that we've been trying to do is, we sort of started about, the reef aquarium hobby is why scientists are able to even restore coral reefs, right? Like literally, Coral Restoration Foundation was founded by Ken Niedermeyer, who is a marine life collector, and then beyond that, all of the equipment that, because like I said, in the year 2000, my professor said, no, we can't keep corals alive, but it was people like Julian, the entrepreneurs that were developing, tinkering at home, coming up with the solutions, figuring out what type of chemical additives, the lighting, protein skimmers, like this was all really done at the hobbyist scale. And kind of cracked the code, and Julian, co-authored the books that taught people how you could do this at home. And so once that technology has now kind of been adopted by the academic world, pretty much they only have hobbyist grade equipment, right? So now it's going the hobbyist stuff is going into academia, and the lights and things that we have are really designed for your living room, right? They're designed for the hobbyist, and so one of the things that we do is we're installing labs around the world to transfer this knowledge to people that need to be growing corals for restoration purposes. And when you're trying to grow corals in a tropical environment in a lab, where you're next to the ocean, it's a totally different type of scenario than growing corals at home. And so one of the weak points for all of this is the fact that lights have fans to keep them cool, and this is where they burn out. And I've heard from like Vincent Chalier tells me, I don't want to use any names, but kind of like one of the most popular type of light out there. He's like, you couldn't even give them to me. I wouldn't use them because they just stopped working in the Bali humidity after 8 months. Literally I toured an academic coral lab about a month ago. And one of the people that I was with, who's also an aquarist, says, wait, there's a Hydra light in the sump? Like somebody had, I don't know how a light winds up in the sump underwater, which is
under the water. Yeah.
Under the water. Like, and this doesn't happen to an aquarist, because an aquarist spent a lot of money out of their own pocket. They're not going to, let a $500, $600 light just sort of, but when you're in a place where there's a bunch of people working, and you got interns or you have undergrads, it's hard to keep track of this type of equipment. And so this is a real weak point. And so what I like about the GNC lights, outside of the fact that you can now program them to spawn, is that you can literally submerge them underwater. Not that they're designed for it, but if they're getting splashed or if they accidentally get dumped, they're going to continue to work. They're passively cooled. They're very heavy duty. I mean, maybe that's one drawback, is that they are heavier because they have a heat sink, but they're very robust. And these are lights that are going to last a decade because they're completely sealed. And the other thing that I like about them, people are always chasing wattage, like especially if you sort of get into the knockoff brands and you're buying them on Amazon, you're just like looking to see who's the more watts, the better, right? But again, in tropical countries, electricity is expensive, and the GNC light uses 140 watts. The Radion uses 210 watts, and they're, at least from my experience, producing the same amount of light output. I think the GNC puts out more. But that's, when you're running a whole lab with 50 or 100 lights, it's a pretty significant difference in energy efficiency. So, and also people are always kind of looking for the highest wattage LEDs. And it's like, that's not really also actually that practical, because that means they're running hot. Which is energy inefficient, which is why you need the fans to get the heat out of there. You need to use lenses, and I don't really like the way that lenses on LEDs. Sometimes you get that effect on the bottom where you see all the different colors kind of mixing together. And the GNC, so the GNC light uses 500 medium output LEDs, whereas I think the Radion uses like around 100 high output LEDs. And so, but by having more lower output LEDs, you have much greater energy efficiency, less heat, and really it creates a really nice spread. And you can see, just like Julian's lights behind you, they don't get into your eyes. This is one of the things where if you have high output LEDs, like this is why people are making like 3D printed shades now to prevent this light from getting into your eyes, and even though they don't have lenses, it's like the spread is really wide. And light gets to the lower parts of your tank much more. It's almost like a T5 type of light spread, and you don't have this kind of disco ball effect on the bottom, which I like. I mean, I like not having that. So there's multiple levels of benefits that I see. It's completely a game changer. It's like everyone was chasing more, higher wattage, more output, but really might not actually be good in the long run. Plus, you can get them to spawn your coral. So that's why I'm all in for these lights. I think that they're really great.
Julian, so how long, Julian, have you been using those lights, and what are your impressions? I mean, well, three-part question. How long impressions of the lights in terms of the, corals, growth and colors, and then in terms of being able to spawn corals, what have you observed?
Okay, well, these were installed in April. So, it's not super long-term yet, but it's
long
interesting.
Enough.
Long enough. I'm not currently running a solar and lunar cycle on these. I'm just running a normal photo period. The app is controlling that. So, I mean, this is a display aquarium, not a lab where I'm spawning the corals, but I'd like to play around with that at some point. One of the things that I noticed right away, first of all, the evening that we installed them, I think my first comment was, "Oh, now I have a worldwide corals tank." If you ever go to Worldwide Corals, there's a certain look of fluorescence in their display tanks that my displays have not quite had. And then all of a sudden, boom, everything's glowing. Okay. And, it's different. There is a higher emphasis on the blue wavelengths in the Blu-ray. I think or in Blu-ray X. And that's probably the reason for the name. And it does make the coral colors pop. And I think that the hobby in general likes that. I like it, but I also like to see, whiter sunlight. So, that's a matter of choice in things. It's definitely catered toward what hobbyists are looking for. And so my corals adapted. There were a number of the corals in the tank that became more colorful than they were before adding the lights. And I had mentioned that to Sanjay when he and I first talked about it, and I said, okay, I've changed these over, and what do you see? And I said, yeah, there's definitely some corals that have colored up, and that was within a couple of weeks of making the change. You could really see it. So I'm watching, continuing to see how that all develops. It's nice without fans. The room is quieter. Because I was running, lights that did produce a bit of a hum.
Have you tried the dunk test yet?
I have not, but I don't know. You may have seen what Tony Vargas did.
Yeah, Reef Keeper mentioned that in the comments. Yeah.
Yes, he did that, and that was a fun video. But you could, I mean, if a light fell into the water, it would be fine. It's not an issue. There's an O-ring seal all the way around.
So go ahead, Colin.
No, go for it.
No, you go. You
Okay,
first.
I was just gonna say, I'm much more of a blue. I live in the blue for the most part. I live in the blue world inside my lab. I
That makes total sense.
I wear my orange glasses all day long. So I'm a big fan of all blue.
Yeah.
But I do, they do have whites. Let me see if I can share, like.
There is a white spectrum in the Blu-ray XM, and with the app, you can adjust how blue they are, as Colin is going to show you.
Yeah, I took this picture today of this is the center section of the 600-gallon Ecological aquarium that I have. And you can see, so, the Blu-ray X is in the middle. You can see the Radion Gen X, or sorry, Gen 6 or 5. Sorry, those are Gen 5s are on either side. You can really see that, like, you can't see the individual LEDs on the Radions, and also that means that's going in your eyes. Whereas the Radion is, this is, I would say this is what I consider daylight. This is kind of like relatively white, speaking so I ramp up, go blue, and then in the middle of the day, I've got all the LEDs on. Whenever I got full on, I measured the par directly under the Blu-ray, and it was right at 1,000. Here, right at the pink Cadillac was getting about 1,000. Directly under the Radions, it's about 750. So puts out definitely, obviously there's a little bit of merger between the two of them, but they're pretty comparable. The light output is pretty much the same. Like it has two like Radions per X, basically, the same type, like, width. So they're much larger. So let me see if I can share another photograph of then on the 200 that I have, and that's not what I was trying. Yeah, here we go. I have a 200-gallon tank that's in the same system that has more LPS and hammer corals. I don't run any whites on it whatsoever. I've got blues. I got a little bit of red. And so you can really kind of see they're much smaller. You can see the heat sink there, and that's for the people that really want the full neon blue experience. I mean, like if you want coral fluorescence, this is definitely the light that is, in my opinion, really is just the best. And so I'm a big fan of the no fans. And it's yeah, they've been really great. I mean, just going to Julian, your aquarium, like you say, I mean, you had corals that started fluorescing that didn't really put out the same
Yeah.
fluorescence, and you talk about how you see fluorescence on your fish that you didn't
Yeah.
see before.
Right. Yeah. In the evening, and we're getting closer to that time, but not quite yet. My photo period is skewed a bit later. But in the last hour or so, there's this UV effect on the fish. I'm sure some of you have seen it if you have LEDs with the bulbs that are deeper. It's not true UV, but it's near UV, 380 nanometers in that range. The colors of the fish are quite different. I mean, sure, if you see fish under actinic bulbs and 420 nanometer, yeah, the blue does influence their colors. But when you get that lower near UV color, there's some really crazy patterns that show up, kind of like, people who study butterfly wings and see what signaling patterns are there. You see this in the fish patterns. I didn't expect that, and seeing it for the first time with the Blu-ray X, it was a bit of a surprise. I don't know of a good way to photograph it. You just have to experience it to appreciate it.
That's always the trick when you've got that blue light on a tank, is to try to like get a true representation in terms of taking pictures and
Yeah.
taking videos of it. So I know Sanjay did a side-by-side test. I don't know if it was side-by-side, but between the Radeon G6s, the GNC Blu-ray X's, and the AI blades. Can you guys share in terms of how that test went, in terms of what he found, in terms of the differences?
Sure. You going to take that, Colin, or?
Well, I can.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that I have.
You can bring it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna see
Yeah,
if I can.
understand what Sanjay was doing is he has a device or a box that measures the light output. And so, the lights were the same distance from the light measuring source.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the same size field that they're illuminating. So he's able, in, the same distance from the light, measure the output in photosynthetically active, photosynthetically usable radiation. And also show what the power consumption is at the same time as producing that photosynthetically useful radiation, and then graph it and make comparisons of different light sources. So this was just the first in a series of articles that Sanjay will be writing. So this was the first one published on Reef Builders, and it compared the Radeon G6 and the Blu-ray X. The blade, of course, is a lower output fixture, but it was interesting to look, again, looking at the power consumption versus light output and see how it compared. But what it found, as you can see in looking at the graphs, was that yes, there was more light output from the GNC Blu-ray X. If you look at a Blu-ray X, you can see form factor. I mean, it's a bigger size than the Radeon Gen 6. It almost looks like you have two. Each Blu-ray X is got about the size of two Radeons. It's not quite double the output, but it's quite a lot more of the output for a lot less watts, as Colin had mentioned. And you can see that in the graphs in Sanjay's article. So,
Let's see, I'm trying to share the. Right. Oops.
you can see. kind of neat, as
what
Colin said,
kind
you
of-
don't have the light get in your eyes when you're right next to it like that. You have to really get under to.
What kind of spread do those fixtures have? I mean, is there any
Yeah,
average in terms of spread?
that's another thing that you can see in Sanjay's article is the spread and how much par you get at a certain distance. It covers, if I remember correctly, it's a 2 by 3 foot. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I would say that the Blu-ray X is probably 36 inches by 30 inches.
Wow.
And then so
Yeah.
then the XM is pretty much a half size. So you
Yeah.
can see there's two basically sides of the Blu-ray X, and the XM is half of that, and so that the XM is probably 24 inches square space, so it's great for smaller tanks, nano tanks, but still also decent sized cube tanks. So it's definitely, I would say, Julian, you have like having 3 of those over your tank is definitely more than enough light. I have two units over the 200 gallon the Elos 160 XL or whatever tank that I have. So it really does put out a really nice spread. It's like a pretty even. You don't get a lot of like hot spot right in the middle. It is it's very much a really nice spread, especially for people that like the T5 kind of spread. In the light, it is definitely. This is from their website, their webpage. I mean, you can see obviously this is for the people that love blue lights over their corals. You can see 140 watts for the X. They say the tank coverage is 35.5 by 27.5 inches, roughly 30 inches by 36 inches. This is what the LEDs, so you can see basically the X is 2 of the XMs in 1 unit, and it's a little heavy, but they do make a bar. In fact, it will also, I think, over Julian's tank, you're hanging it from the Radion, the bar that the RMS bar. You can hang them from the same exact type of bar. You can also, it comes with a suspension kit. You can hang it, or you can get a bridge for your tank to hold them over, because I think that they weigh about 12 pounds each. The X's, so it's not
pretty hefty.
Yeah, they're pretty hefty. I mean, because there's a heat sink, but they're heavy duty. It's this is not really there's no plastic. It is an Italian design. It's very, very sleek and really, really well made. And so Two Little Fishies is now distributing them. So any distributors out there should definitely hit up Julian about getting them. And I think that there's they've been on the market in Europe for the GNC brand. I think that there's many iterations. This is now kind of like their after a lot of generations, they've made product that they're ready to bring to North America. So this is sort of the first time that they've been available widely here in the United States. And I'm trying to get them. I see them being very valuable for coral restoration, because I go to these labs and people are having to put in spreadsheets and utilize Apex controllers to control the lights, and it's a lot of it's pretty complicated still, and it really shouldn't be that complicated. So it's nice that they've developed the next iteration of the app is going to be able to, you're going to be able to, you know, pick a reef around different reefs around the world, and it'll have the same, you know, solar and lunar cycle is what you find in different places around.
So what I'm hearing from you guys is that these lights are certainly more than capable of growing and coloring up corals, and they do an especially great job in terms of bringing out that fluorescence. But they can also make it easy if you want to try to attempt to do some coral spawning at
Right.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Cool.
You know, it's going to be interesting to see what hobbyists are capable of doing when we have this at the push of a button with an app.
Yeah.
You know, I know
Because I have not attempted this. I haven't even tried to like go down that road to try to induce coral spawning. But it's a pretty complicated process, right? I mean, I guess there's Apex programs that you could have synced up to your lights to help induce the coral spawning. But it sounds like these lights, in terms of the spectrum and in terms of the photo periods and the lunar cycles and what have you, are going to make it more turnkey.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, aquarist Jamie Craggs really pioneered that work using aquarium equipment, the Apex and the Radiance, programming it to make that happen, and showed that this was something that could be replicated. He didn't just get lucky, and he installed that for a number of institutions. So now bringing it into the package with a system like this should make it that much easier for people who want to try that at home. It's, you know, of course, not so difficult to get the corals to spawn, but then of course you have to be there when they do, get the larvae, settle them, and then have a system to grow them out.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. But we're all dedicated hobbyists.
Yeah, there you go.
Right?
Is it true that you can create new color morphs via coral spawning?
Theoretically, that should be possible.
Man, that's pretty cool.
You know, of course, the environment under which you raise them affects the colors that ultimately develop. So you have two factors at play there. And if you're really successful and you produce large numbers, then you just have selection too. So there's a lot of opportunities for developing interesting looking corals.
Thanks to Nick Million, first time able to catch your live. Love everything you were doing and the great conversations. Keep it up, brother, from Houston. Thank you so much. So you guys have mentioned a couple of times in terms of you know, this potentially helping the coral reefs around the world. How do we connect that in terms of, you know, the work that is being done now in terms of coral spawning and the research and all that sort of thing? How does that translate to the wild?
In my opinion, the weakest link in all of coral science is the lack of trained aquarists. You know, you can't do good science if you don't have a stable system, or you don't really know how to, you know, keep you need a baseline first. And so, you know, a big problem with once you get into bureaucracies and larger institutions, you know, it's not always clear who's in charge. You know, the buck gets passed around. They make interns, oh, you know, who's going to be scraping the algae and siphoning detritus. And a lot of places don't even allow you to have, say, grazers in the tank. You know, you can't have fish in the tank. You know, they're trying to grow corals in sterile boxes because they think that that's the, you know, the way to make things as clean as possible. But, you know, I mean, I've gone to a number of coral aquaculture systems at institutions where it's like there's nothing in the tank but the corals, and there's no nutrients in the water because they're trying to keep the algae down. But it's like you look at the coral and they're half bleached because there's no nutrients in the water. There's no nitrogen, there's no phosphorus. You know, it's sort of like, you know, that I think that think hobbyists understand that to keep a reef aquarium or to keep a coral happy, you need an ecosystem, right? You need the fish. We know this from the wild. I've been to reefs around the world where the water's crystal clear, but because of overfishing, there's no parrotfish. There's no more urchins anymore, and everything is overgrown with algae because the ecosystem is out of whack. And so I feel like hobbyists really have in a way a much better feeling. Like a reef aquarium, keeping a reef aquarium is an alchemy, right? It's not a strict science. It's just like cooking. Cooking is an alchemy where it boils down to chemistry, what making food, but really there's, it's the heart that you have in it. Grandma, you can't just replicate grandma's cooking. A robot can't really do that. And I think reef keeping is kind of similar thing where when you have somebody that's been growing corals because they're passionate, because they're really invested, and they can look at a coral and you can almost even tell that that something's off. Like this is something that only an aquarist that's been doing it for a while can really understand. And I think that we're starting to see that recognition in the world of coral restoration, coral science, academia, where they realize that we need more aquarists. And unfortunately, there's not really universities. They don't really teach you how the basics. And so this is where right now there's actually some great opportunities. Like I know that there's in Saudi Arabia, there's an opportunity for an aquarist that'll probably pay 6 figures a year. Like there's this, in my opinion, is the most kind of important thing. Like it's great to see Justin Credible just recently moved down to Moat Marine Lab down in the Keys. Julian has Justin's coral foods. He's one of the best coral aquaculturists in the country. And so to see that transition now going towards helping out the world of coral science by hobbyists or people that have a background in the hobby, to me is that's an exciting development, because like I said, 24 years ago, they said, no, you can't do it. And you guys are the reason why the coral reefs are dying. And we're starting to see that perspective finally change.
Right. Yeah. One of the, features though in university institution type things, of course, is there's always the 4-year cycle. So if you have a student who is an experienced hobbyist, he's only going to be there for a certain period of time and then move on. Not likely he's going to be staying. It's different from a company situation. The academic situation always has a time limit for the people. Hopefully that can be modified by students training the next generation each couple of years. So that's been a difficult thing. I mean, for me, I stay in touch with a number of different university departments that are working with corals, and seeing that change. You can feel that you're always starting new again when there's a new batch of students. And that's sort of a tricky thing to overcome, but hopefully institutions will realize that and work to mitigate it through their own staff and students. But to the question that Keith asked, yeah, I mean, it really is translating. What we do is translating to the field of reef restoration. And what that means is that every year there are more and more new companies that are getting into that field. At the same time, funny enough, that through climate change and bleaching events, we see more and more regions around the world actually needing reef restoration. When Ken Niedermeyer started Coral Restoration Foundation in the Florida Keys, it was really needed in the Florida Keys. And then it became more needed throughout the Caribbean. Of course, the Caribbean had its issues starting with the diadema die-off, but there were still lots of healthy areas with a lot of corals. But in recent years, the past 5 to 10 years, more and more areas have suffered extensive bleaching events, especially last year, where now very large losses of corals, and that opens the door for the need to have on-site local coral restoration entities set up to do transplanting, to do mass culture, either mariculture or upland in labs. Recently, the Red Sea, which has been almost immune to these bleaching events, has suffered some large areas of coral losses. And so now we're seeing more interest in reef restoration in the Red Sea. It's unfortunately something that's happening. The only fortunate thing that can be said is that the technology has developed so that this can be scaled up around the globe, where one of the limiting factors is getting the expertise, getting the people who know how to do it to all of these places to make it happen. Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, guys. Really just very very informative, and it's good to know that hobbies can kind of make a big contribution to the ocean's reefs in terms of preservation. Pretty cool stuff.
Right. And of course, there's always detractors who are saying that what we do is just too small to matter. But I don't agree with that. I think that there are plenty of stumbling blocks to making it scale properly. But we know that, and there's a lot of good minds working on it. We know how to mass fragment, vegetatively propagate corals, and we know now how to mass spawn them. So the combined efforts of the two, plus skill, people to raise them and maintain them, knowing how to select hardy strains, all of this is well known. Then the biggest issue is in transplanting, will the environment be suitable for those corals? Through proper selection, I think we can come up with a way of solving those problems. For the Caribbean, the mass culture of diadema to help deal, with the loss of that important keystone herbivore. Martin Moe worked out those details years ago and published a book about it. Now you have University of Florida and the Florida Aquarium have perfected the techniques that he developed, and they're able to produce more and more larvae. I'm hopeful that work combined with the the development of more mass spawning of corals and selecting hardy strains, it's going to show the detractors that, hey, this is a real thing. I think pardon me for going on and on. I think it was really wonderful how successful Ken Niedermeyer was and still is with the Coral Restoration Foundation and his new entity, demonstrating vegetative propagation and transplanting, how when the conditions are right, how quickly the corals do grow. Of course, that was mainly dealing with the two Acropora species. Now new work is being done with other species. So that initial success was helpful in squashing a lot of the initial detractors saying, oh, this just couldn't work to scale. But it did. Of course, Mother Nature then came in and said, well, we'll throw a nice bleaching event at you and show you how you need to keep working on this. You know, you're still a novice. But I think we do know what needs to be done. It's just, you know, continued determination to improve.
Well, reef keeping hobbyists are very a resilient bunch, right? So
Yes.
always find a way to figure it out.
It's the end goal, the dream of Coral Morphologic, you know, is to have a coral museum here based in Miami, because, you know, we are also at that point where we do need to just be banking coral genotypes, you know, for spawning, for research, but just simply to keep them in climate controlled conditions. And I think that there can be a very elegant way of doing that from a practical perspective, as well as, you know, being able to engage the public in a way that is sort of, you know, a hybrid public aquarium, art museum. You know, if you come to the Coral Morphologic Lab, you see, you know, the way we present corals in small glass boxes is very different than, you know, typically you go to a public aquarium, they've got a really big reef tank that's really impressive. There's so many fish, there's so many corals, you know, to the novice or the person that doesn't really know the difference between a fiberglass coral and a real coral. You know, they're just like the pretty fish. You know, to be able to showcase the corals, you know, in a way that is more like, you know, you're showcasing a work of art inside of a glass box. I think is, you know, Miami is a place for that, and every place around the world that has coral reefs should have their own collection of local biodiversity, and this should be where people are trained in, you know, aquarist skills, coral aquaculture, coral spawning. And, you know, we need that. We're sort of the same way there's a seed bank, you know, in Norway. We need coral banks, and those can be the places where we are training those hobbyists or those aquarists. And that's, you know, so
For a full-time field.
that's you know, Miami would be a great place for that. And wouldn't it be amazing to have a Two Little Fishies Coral Morphologic designed coral experience that you could visit? That's the dream.
Well, I want to add that, you know, Colin knows very well that there, you know, simultaneously, see, I try to say all these things together. First of all, Coral Restoration Foundation, Ken Niedermeyer highlighted the collaboration that could be had between an entity that does coral restoration and the dive industry and tourism. So you have these three different interests, and they can work together. People who are tourists are interested in doing adventurous stuff, and helping Mother Nature is something that makes people feel good. And dive boats have, you know, a ready audience, and that they're working in the same place as the coral restoration. So Ken pointed out that kind of collaboration is really synergistic and wonderful. At the same time, now we have, you know, Colin, the Reef Line project, which is an art project, and it's in the same way tying together tourism, coral reefs, restoration, and protection of the the beaches. It's a really interesting creative project, and it's here in Miami. That kind of thing could tie into a coral museum. You can have this like-minded thoughts, right? That you have people who are coming to have a new experience and absorb this new content and new visual stuff, and visiting Miami to see a museum with beautiful fluorescent corals, and to help plant a coral, and to see the sculpture that's involved in the reef line. We've been talking about all of these things for a number of years since I met you, but it really seems to be coming together now. And Miami is kind of a mecca for this kind of stuff. I just hope that the Coral Museum does come to fruition someday. It's been been on your bucket list a long time.
A long time. And you're totally right. I mean, it's only the zeitgeist is more and more, a lot of that, of course, is the, as things get worse for natural reefs, there's more of a need, there's more of an interest, and so it's sort of the silver lining of all of the bad stuff is that people do care more. They're more aware now. More people want to be involved, and now is the time to really, we don't have a lot of time left. So right now I started screen sharing. This is a reef off of Miami. It's one of my favorite reefs. It's an artificial reef that was deployed 30 years ago by the county. Just piles of limestone boulders. No corals were transplanted there. They call it the Port of Miami Mitigation Reef Site B, which doesn't sound interesting whatsoever. I've sort of rebranded it as Cosmic Reef. You can see it from space, and I've taken Julian out a few times. In fact, he managed to collect a fragment of a gorgonian that he'd never seen before. And the fact that this is just a couple of miles right off of the mouth of the Port of Miami. In 40 feet of water, and covered in types of corals that have suffered tremendous die-off due to disease and bleaching over the last few years. To see it thriving here, and to serve as a place where people can go diving, because in a lot of ways, the irony of ecotourism on coral reefs is that if you've gone to the Florida Keys, the places where they have the mooring buoys for dive boats is usually the saddest reefs to dive because of the amount of dive tourism pressure and people kicking and so on. And so to utilize artificial reefs as a place for tourists to go, I think is also really powerful. And this was not artistically designed, and so Julian was alluding to a project that I'm a co-founder called the Reef Line that's going to be right off the shore of Miami Beach. And talking to Julian over the years where as a kid he could just go out right off of Miami Beach and there was coral heads and you could snorkel and dive right off of the beach. And then over the years, because the beach is such an important part of the economy here, it took precedence over the coral reefs. And when they add sand to the beach, of course it just goes back into the ocean and it smothers all the hard bottom. And we've forgotten that there was a reef right off of Miami Beach. So, you need a boat to get out to reefs, and that makes it difficult for, somebody that doesn't have a boat. It becomes expensive to access. And so the whole idea of this Reef Line project is, to put hardscape back near shore, where you will be able to access it from the beach. You won't need a boat. And then utilizing sculptures designed by artists as a way to attract more people, I think is also, a great way and an equitable way to get people to, appreciate the local environment. But, this is just one example of, what could be, and nobody really cares outside of a handful of people that this reef is successful, because there is also a narrative that if everything's bad, there's some organizations don't have much to gain by giving people hope, which is also we live in a time where our emotions are depending on what media that we're consuming, we hear all of the bad news all of the time, and at a certain point people tend to just tune out and give up and say, well, the reefs are screwed. We got Scolimaya here, lots of Scolimaya on this reef, and Gorgonian heaven, sponge heaven. I mean, I think that this reef has probably got some of the highest biodiversity of soft corals and sponges of just about anywhere in South Florida. This is
And you can see the corals, the stony corals there among the gorgonians are by and large all healthy. That was a real thrill to see after last year's bleaching events, where we had water temperatures in the upper 90s in South Florida. That's just crazy hot. These corals all survived it. And are healthy. So
There are glimmers of hope amongst
super corals.
amongst the doom, but yes, these are
Yeah.
some super corals here, and you know, I love, you know, we've got the Mycetophilia here, which is one of my favorite Caribbean corals. Is one of the most corals there. It's sort of like our Caribbean
There's
challenge.
one.
Yeah.
That video
Wow.
you hadn't really seen any, but look, and they're not scarce. They're all over this reef. There's lots of them, really big, you know, 2 foot and more colonies.
Yeah. So I do some dives. There's a local dive charter called Divers Paradise. I think that must be you, Julian, up there in the top corner.
Oh yeah.
Where we've gone out, we remove ropes because, of course, you know, lobster trap ropes are a problem. Every time there's a storm, lobster traps get tossed around and the ropes get tangled up. And then when the ropes whip back and forth, they're, you know, killing corals and abrading the gorgonians. And so there's, you know, we've removed a lot of ropes off of this reef. But you know, if anyone comes to Miami, you know, look up Divers Paradise and see if there's a dive out to Cosmic Reef, because it's a good one. It's you know, and it's easy. It's 40 feet deep, about 30 feet to the top of the piles of reef. And again, like I was saying earlier, this is not a type of habitat you find in Florida. You don't have big caves and overhangs and steep rocky surfaces, and so it's really kind of created a really unique habitat that really doesn't exist down in the Keys. And again, you know, it's just sort of like, but it's just an artificial reef, so what? But you can see this with your own eyes and say, well, this is actually pretty impressive. In a lot of ways, it's a lot healthier than most of the natural reefs nearby.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Simply gorgeous. Well, listen, guys, this was an amazing conversation, a very enlightening conversation. How can people out there, you know, support this kind of work besides, you know, visiting and you know, being there firsthand to participate in some of this stuff? I mean, is there a way that they could lend support online to something?
Well, we have, believe it or not, we have Give Miami Day this week. Thursday is the Give Miami Day. The Coral City camera is all run as a nonprofit. We have fiscal sponsorship through the Key Biscayne Community Foundation, 501c3. So on Thursday is the sort of the biggest fundraiser of the year. If you want to make a tax-deductible donation for Coral City Foundation, and we're working to improve the internet connection. We're putting a hydrophone underwater. We've got the new lab that we're building. Of course, anyone in the industry that wants to, you know, sponsor with equipment for this new lab, definitely more than welcome to entertain that. We're going to have the coral clock that we're going to get online this year. So, you know, there's definitely ways that they can support on that front. And, you know, of course, I use Two Little Fishies products in the Coral Morphologic lab, and it's, you know, great stuff. I use the GFO, you know, I use the hydrocarbon, I use the phosphban, I use Begonia Power food, I use Acro Power for my SPS tanks. I mean, the blue colors on Julian, the blues that I'm pulling out of the acros in that tank are just really, it's very, very noticeable that the Acro Power has definitely improved the colors of all my sticks. You know, I use you know, and on and on. So, you know, I like how, you know, there's not too many brands out there that a single person their name is behind, and you know, Julian, any of the products that he makes is you know, it's anything that he uses and has made himself, I think is always trustworthy, and you should support Two Little Fishies products wherever you can. My fish love the purple seaweed, the nori that you sell. They go nuts for that, and so, you know, buy some Two Little Fishies products. Watch the Coral City camera.
And I was going to say also, if you want some, you know, turnkey lights to potentially try some coral spawning in your home aquarium, and also to grow and color up corals, then you're going to have to
got to get the
Two Little Fishies,
GNC
through Two Little Fishies. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, guys,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Again, this was an incredibly informative chat. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. I learned a lot, and I'm assuming that everybody out there really appreciates the insights and all the information. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith,
for having us.
Yes,
Yep.
thanks for having us, and thanks for all that you've done over the years with Rappin with ReefBum.
Yeah, it's an honor to be in the last of the episodes.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. I always enjoy having folks on that can really kind of help me and other people learn out there, and that's what I think that's the main thing, is trying to foster that learning environment. So that's always a real treat for me. So I appreciate you guys for sure. Thank you so much for those kind words.
Yeah, have a good night, Julian. We'll see you soon.
Yep. I also want to thank the sponsors one more time. Polo Reef. Make sure to check out Polo Reef's new YouTube video that dropped last Friday, where the Polo team goes over updates from their infamous 900-gallon glass drop-down tank from breaking in transit, then redelivered to Scape and inhabitants. Find out what's been going on with this crazy aquarium. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Polo Reef for video drop notifications. Champion Lighting and Supply. Besides being a place for hobbyists to purchase saltwater aquarium supplies online, Champion Lighting is also a wholesale distributor for many popular brands. If you own an aquarium store or an aquarium service company, contact Champion Lighting through their website at championlighting.com to set up a wholesale account. And then finally, Fauna Marin. I do use the Fauna Marin Reef ICP Total Test Kit, which gives a quick, accurate, and easy overview of over 90 water values in reef aquariums, from macro elements to trace elements and pollutants. You get a complete overview with corresponding dosage and action recommendations. A big thank you to Paul, who's also the moderator as well as the president of the Boston Reefer Society. Please join and support your local reefing clubs. They are so important to this hobby.
Yes,
also want to let you know that yes, they really are. And also want to let you know that all episodes of Rappin with ReefBum are available as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon. My next Rappin with ReefBum live stream, this will be another good one. It will be next Tuesday, November 26th. 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to have Sanjay on, Paletta, and Claude from Fauna Marin. You can check out the full upcoming schedule of guests on reefbum.com under the YouTube section. So until next time, be safe.